Bill Armstrong, Colorado, and the United States have one of the very outstanding national leaders in the United States Senate. You must re-elect him.
Thank God for America. There's just never been anything like our country, never a place of so much freedom.
I have the honor tonight of introducing a great champion of human rights and justice, Senator William Armstrong.
Because to this day, these are the principles that have meant freedom and equality and liberty for the people of this country. Mr. President Victor Hugo wrote, "Greater than the tread of a mighty army is an idea whose time has come." And that idea is not strategic, it is not credibility, it is not politics, it's not hotboxing members of the House of Representatives. That idea is human freedom. It became obvious to me within, literally over a weekend, that God was calling me to this noble task of being president of Colorado Christian University. It was just so clear to me that the opportunity, the challenge, the significance, the importance of this task was so great that everything that I had done all my life up till then was God's preparation for this task.
The spirit of America has set the standard for freedom around the world. Every generation has faced serious challenges and successfully overcome them to preserve that freedom. For our generation, the warning signs are everywhere. America's founding principles are under direct assault, and the need for enlightened leadership has never been greater. The William L. Armstrong Award honors courageous leaders who call us to a higher standard, whose work ensures that freedom will not die on our watch. I'm Will Armstrong, son of the late Senator and Colorado Christian University President William L. Armstrong. This award was named in honor of my father, follower of Jesus Christ, husband of over 50 years, father of a daughter and a son, grandfather of 8, Colorado statesman, United States Congressman, United States Senator, Colorado Christian University President, and successful businessman. This award is presented annually to a leader who embodies the values that my father held dear: faith, family, and freedom, and who's made a difference in our culture through business, politics, or education. These are the heroes who give us hope for America's future. Their lives are role models of the public and private virtues that make America exceptional. In this film, we're going to look back at my dad's legacy, hoping to inspire all of us to renew our dedication to America's founding principles, to invest in the next generation of leaders, and to be re-energized to continue this essential work. And of course, we're going to talk about this year's honoree, Bob Woodson, author, civil rights activist, founder of the Woodson Center, and pioneer in empowering low-income communities. We're excited about this because, as you'll see, Bob is the classic embodiment of Dad's legacy. Bill Armstrong was born in Nebraska during the depths of the Great Depression, near the center of the Dust Bowl. He was only 4 when the bombing of Pearl Harbor thrust America into the Second World War, the aftermath of which left the world on the brink of nuclear destruction for the next 50 years. The innovations of radio brought real-time news of the war into the Armstrong home, and young Bill was mesmerized by radio's ability to engage the mind with the power of stories. For the rest of his life, he would be fascinated by innovation and new technology. At the age of 11, he got his first job broadcasting a children's radio program in Fremont, Nebraska. He met the father of Top 40 radio and became America's first teenage Top 40 disc jockey. At the same time, he understood the importance of civic duty and enlisted for military service. Dreaming of owning his own business, he bought KOSI Radio in Aurora, Colorado, when he was just 22 years old. He became a highly successful entrepreneur and small businessman. It was in Denver that he met and married Ellen Eaton, his partner in politics, business, faith, and family for nearly 54 years. Alarmed at the rapid growth and overreach of government, Armstrong answered the call of politics and became one of the most influential statesmen of his time, a transformative figure in Colorado politics for 5 decades. A forerunner of the fledgling conservative movement, he served 3 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives.
I'm going to be talking about taxes and why we need to reduce the taxes, about why we need to keep control of Colorado's water in Colorado and not let Jimmy Carter or anybody else take it over. When they see me coming down the street, people way down the distance are going to say, here comes that guy that wants to cut my taxes. When Floyd Haskell and I went to Washington, the national debt was more or less $435 billion. It has been raised 9 times in the years since then. On each occasion, that's come to a vote in the House of Representatives, and I voted against it because I think it is inflationary. I think it hurts our economy. I think it hurts the people of our state.
He was elected to the United States Senate in 1978 during a time of runaway inflation, rampant unemployment, double-digit interest rates, and embarrassing failures of foreign policy. He led the effort to index tax rates to inflation, which has saved American families untold billions. It also contributed to unprecedented economic growth.
Under President Reagan, and with Republicans spearheading the effort in the United States Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, we've got this country moving again.
Re-elected in 1984, he became chairman of the Republican Policy Committee, the 3rd-ranking leader in the Senate. He was noted for approaching the most difficult issues with civility and with a sharp and contagious sense of humor.
Pretty soon, here came 2 officers from the sheriff's department, 2 deputy sheriffs, and the first thing they did is they walked over and looked at my cow, and one of them said, "Why, this poor animal is in agony." And the other one said, "Yes, you're right," and pulled out his pistol and shot it. Then they came across the road to me. And they said, "How are you feeling?" Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling good about America.
Republican William Armstrong of Colorado, who looked into the case.
Senator William Armstrong of Colorado has announced that he will hold Senate hearings next month.
That we will find some formula to bring the federal budget in balance, and that probably all of the automatically indexed programs will be part of that solution.
Gentlemen, thank you both. It's going to be a hot issue, and I'm glad we started talking about it now.
Thank you, Chris.
Senator William Armstrong of Colorado.
Senator William Armstrong of Colorado.
Our guest is Senator William Armstrong, Republican of Colorado, one of the rising young conservatives in the Republican Party.
Okay, let me interrupt you there and get over to Senator Armstrong, who I'm sure would like to refute some of those things. Senator?
If Armstrong had his druthers, he'd start by firing his fellow senators.
Well, I think probably throw the rascals out. Somehow we've created a system in which there's a reverse synergy, where the collective actions are dumber than the actions that any one of them would take.
Senator William Armstrong, a profile in the 100th Congress. I'm Mark Walton, CNN, reporting.
He helped reform entitlements, pushed to keep Social Security solvent, and fought to reinstate the GI Bill, which is now a permanent benefit of military service. He worked closely with President Reagan to limit the growth of government, to strengthen the American economy, and to modernize the world's strongest military.
President, I close just by saying thank you, God bless you. And the very last words, which I would like to say to my colleagues, are these, from the very last verse of the last book of the Holy Scripture. The grace of the Lord Jesus be with all.
Bill Armstrong became an important leader in the national evangelical movement and was one of the most popular speakers at prayer breakfasts and other Christian events across the nation. After he keynoted the National Prayer Breakfast in 1988, Billy Graham called him the most inspirational and enlightening speaker the breakfast has ever had. He was the sponsor of the Year of the Bible and the National Day of Prayer. He taught that civic involvement is a Christian duty. In 2006, Bill Armstrong became president of Colorado Christian University, which he thought was the great calling and most important work of his life. During his tenure, CCU doubled its enrollment and achieved higher academic standards, a stronger curriculum, a campus transformed with new buildings, and a generation of young people inspired by his faith and his example. He always stressed involvement in contemporary issues as an important part of CCU's mission. Under his leadership, the Centennial Institute was founded, and he launched the Western Conservative Summit. Although Bill Armstrong passed away in 2016, the Armstrong Legacy Initiative is now underway at CCU. The cornerstone is the new Armstrong Center, a 60,000 square foot building that includes the university's first dedicated worship chapel and a new library, conference center, and facilities for music, theater, and the performing arts. The Legacy Initiative will continue to build the university and inspire new generations of active Christian citizens who will continue the stewardship of faith, family, and freedom, the great cause of Bill Armstrong's life.
This is a time when we need our most outstanding men and women to be filled with dedication and energy to lead our country in a more wholesome, more thoughtful, more godly direction and restore not only the Christian principles of our nation, but the founding political and constitutional principles of the United States of America. For more than 4 decades, Bob Woodson has dedicated his life to helping low-income people of all races address the problems of their communities through self-help and neighborhood empowerment. Through his writings, speeches, and counsel, he has influenced a generation of thought leaders at the highest levels, while providing inspiration and strategies to help and empower neighborhood leaders in distressed communities. Bob has promoted measurable results and living examples that provide proof of his principles in reclaimed lives and restored communities. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as I confer with great pleasure the degree of Doctorate of Humanities on Mr. Robert L. Woodson, Sr.
Bob Woodson is a rare American leader, a solutionist who approaches every aspect of his life with the intention of helping improve lives and communities.
The big crisis facing America is not racial. It is the moral and spiritual freefall that is consuming our children. We must come together and look beyond race and realize America is drowning because it's in a moral and spiritual freefall. None of us should be defined by the worst of what we were in the past, but we should be defined by what we want to become in the future. The challenge that we face, are we going to give voice to the least of God's children as a measure of our effectiveness and leadership? The answers will come by going into the community suffering the problem and finding out, not from the 70% of the households that are raising children that are dropping out of school in jail, but what is happening in the 30% of the households of people who are not dropping out of school on jail and drugs.
His work has enabled thousands of people to lift themselves out of poverty and showed generations of political leaders the importance of studying success, not failure. Bob is the founder and inspirational leader of the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, now known as the Woodson Center, which empowers grassroots leaders with the resources to transform their communities. What began decades ago has now invested over $50 million in 800 cities and touches tens of thousands of lives each year. Christy and I have spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., and we are always inspired by its history, and especially our national monuments to freedom, liberty, and justice. During our most recent trip, we took Bob Woodson and his wife Ellen to the Library of Congress, where we reviewed the congressional record of housing legislation from the 1980s that Bob and my father championed, and reflected on how innovative policy can have such a lasting impact on so many people. And we toured the Woodson Center. Then Bob and I sat down for an in-depth conversation about his life's work, his faith, and his thoughts for the future. My big desire is to continue to tell not only the story that you have, but to build on the legacy of Bob Woodson. And so as I start today, I'm sort of curious, if the headline read, "This is Bob Woodson," what would the story be?
Preamble would be, God, give me the strength to tell and pursue the truth, especially when it's inconvenient to me. That would be the first. And the second would be, I want to soar where others are afraid to walk. What I try to do is empty myself of self-importance so that I can be a perfect vessel. I always remind myself to stay humble, that I'm merely an instrument, that I'm not the story.
My dad used to say that you could disagree with somebody without being disagreeable. You've been able to navigate through to affect change. How have you done that?
I'm not interested in winning an argument. I'm interested in advancing a proposition that has the consequence of helping somebody who's in need. And so I learned so much in terms of demeanor and how one gets things done by not engaging in combat in order to make a point. The question is, what can be done that promotes redemption?
Right. Bob, you've described yourself as a cardiac Christian and a radical pragmatist. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Tell me what that means.
It means I feel Christ in my heart. I don't feel him as a Baptist or anything. I just feel driven by Christ is in my heart and what he speaks to me to do. But he also directs me to take action in his name. But I'm a radical pragmatist. I seek strategic alliances with people, but I'm willing to go wherever the truth is.
Bob, the whole idea of neighborhood empowerment, when you started to begin with the Woodson Center and so forth, was really kind of a radical idea. What led you to that? And what was really the idea that prompted it for you to say, this is going to be my life's work and I'm going to pursue it as you have?
Because I witnessed the impact. In my hometown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there was the youth gang capital of America. It was a woman that I met, Sister Falaka Fatah and David, found out the oldest of their 6 sons was a gang member, so she invited him to bring his friends home. They sat up all night and talked. She said, why don't you move in with me? And the House of Umoja was born, urban boys' town. And gang members from all over the city began to come. 100 of them now were living in peace in this one block. They went down from like 53 gang members down to 2 in less than 1 year. And I followed her around for 3 years as a practitioner. And I wrote a book called A Summons to Life. So what I did was make legible that which was illegible, to explain how the spiritual foundation of what she did translated into secular consequences of changing the lives of people. That's the foundation of the Woodson Center, and that's what we do to try to bring these two worlds together, scholarly deliberations and practical interventions. And so the Woodson Center was set up over 40 years ago to be the voice of low-income people of all races.
Let me take you back to 1986. Your paths crossed with my dad's. Tell us how you got acquainted, not only with my dad, but the important catalyst that began for him and for you.
In 1986, we had been working with some grassroots residents of public housing. And in fact, one of them was profiled on 60 Minutes, that these residents had gone in and driven out the drug dealers and just took charge. So we were seeking to legally give them the right to manage their own development and own it. And no one thought it was possible. I reached out to your dad as a conservative Republican. I said, Bill, would you co-sponsor this with Alan Dixon from Illinois? Bill said, yes. Republicans were against it, but Bill Armstrong stood up. He had no political reason to do that. He was a man who was committed to principle of uplifting the poor. And so he signed on and reached across the aisle to Alan Dixon, and they co-sponsored in the Senate. And when it came to a vote, it passed 93-0 in the Senate. And Ronald Reagan signed it into law, flanked by myself and resident leadership.
What's the lesson we learned from that time?
Your dad put principle above politics and the well-being of the poor against any other consideration. And I'll never forget the kind of leadership he provided.
Bob, I know that you got involved in Colorado Christian University because of your longtime friendship with my dad. Tell us a little bit about your experience from CCU. Why does that matter in our times today?
Because the universities today have become a source of moral pollution, as too many of them have become woke. And so it's just refreshing to be associated with a university like CCU that pushes back against that refuses to succumb to the lure of racial politics, and instead seeks godly foundation for what it does, to stay faithful to the gospel.
Our conversation today we've talked about a lot of different issues. It's given me a great amount of hope. What are things that give you hope as you look out in the future?
What gives me hope is every time I go to one of these communities, and I took the ABC News over to a group of young gang members there where they have 4 guys who've done an average of 20 years in prison. They said, if we have this kind of control in prison, we can have it on the streets. And to sit around that table and watch the transference of values from that generation to the new group, and to see young men that I knew who have spent half their life in and out of prison becoming peace ambassadors, and to see redemption in action.
That gives you hope.
That gives me hope. Because if they can be redeemed, anybody can be redeemed.
Bob Woodson is an innovative leader who has set a higher standard from which we can all find hope and inspiration. He has dedicated his life and talents to the great cause of faith, family, and freedom, the very heart of the William L. Armstrong Award.
This is a time to be strong and very courageous, to be bold, to be creative, to be brilliant, to be the salt of the earth.
Please welcome Chairman of the Board of Trustees, Will Armstrong.
Hey everybody, please, please, please. We're going to stand for Bob Woodson here in a minute.
What an absolute treat to be here. In some ways, I sort of feel like this is Old Home Week. And from the bottom of my heart, I can just not thank you enough for being here with us. I mean, there are friends here who are our neighbors. There are friends here joining us from West Cliff, Colorado, and from all over the country. I've got friends, obviously, my colleagues from the Board of Trustees and my friends at Colorado Christian University, business friends. As I was sitting earlier, Sam, I was thinking about my dad, but I also thought about my mom. This is my first time I'm given this award with Christy and my sister Annie, where my mother is not here. And walking around campus when I arrived this morning about 8 o'clock, and I saw the great new building, the Armstrong Center, that we're so excited about dedicating tomorrow. I hope, by the way, that all of you will join us. It's going to be the great new cornerstone of campus. It's not about my dad. More on that tomorrow. But as I gathered today, I feel a little sentimental. Forgive me if I appear so. But it just warms my heart to not only be thinking about my dad tonight, but also this occasion that brings us together. It's so gratifying, Christy and me, this year to present the William L. Armstrong Award to our friend, Bob Woodson. In our joy and excitement at the work that God's doing here, I sort of wanted to echo my dad and pause for just a second. He said in our film, always stressed involvement in contemporary issues as an important part of CCU's mission. Well, we're just, as we all know, we're all watching the news. We're a few weeks away from the national election. Political discourse is intense, division and disunity in our communities, global war and disruption in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Friends, it's easy to lose hope and to be discouraged. And yet tonight, we're not gathered here without hope. We have the hope of our faith, yes, which is all we need. Today we gather with great hope to honor and be inspired by a man whose very life is the role model of public and private virtue, of care for the poor, of the love of Jesus. Don't we need more of that? Yes? Can I get an amen for that? Bob, you are a hero to all of us. Bob does speak the truth, even when it's not convenient to him, with a perspective that comes from real life, on real streets of real cities. And he does so with civility and compassion and love. Our friend is a hero of civil rights. In a time of racial divisions and tensions, Bob has set a higher standard, and he's become a moral and spiritual role model to generations. He is a longtime hero of the conservative movement, particularly to those of us who value freedom and personal responsibility, and an understanding that whatever we do for the least of these, well, we do for him. Bob's work at the Woodson Center has brought us hope, and has brought hopes to tens of thousands of people in America's inner cities, and has proven that when people are given ownership of their destiny, they not only survive, friends, they thrive. Neighborhood empowerment was a novel idea 50 years ago, but today, thanks to Bob's work, it's recognized as the solution to many of America's most pressing urban problems. And it's no secret, Bob was a hero to my pop. Dad particularly appreciated Bob's effectiveness in calling attention to and examining the work of our heroes. That is to study their success, what they did right, and not focus on failure. Bob's book, The Triumphs of Joseph, was pivotal, touching off years of debate about the concept of victimhood. Many of us have long appreciated Bob's frankness in writing that, quote, a victimizer can injure or even kill, but it takes another's willing participation to become a victim. It's no wonder my father asked Bob to serve on the Board of Trustees at CCU, and as you saw in the film, presented him with an honorary doctorate in 2010. CCU is a better university today because of Bob Woodson. And friends, our neighborhoods and communities, our country itself is better today because of Bob Woodson. So on behalf of Christy and me and my entire family, my sister Annie, our kids, in partnership with Colorado Christian University, we are especially proud tonight to present the William L. Armstrong Award, named in honor of my father, to our friend, the cardiac Christian, the radical pragmatist, the man who wants to soar where others are afraid to walk, Bob Woodson. Bob, thank you for all you've done, for all you continue to do. We are so grateful. Congratulations.
Please welcome the winner of the 2024 William L. Armstrong Award, Bob Woodson.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Woodson.
It is, I'm speechless. It's hard to live up to all of that. I hope I don't. I want to acknowledge my lovely wife for 47 years, Ellen Woodson, who's with me. We have 3 brand new grandbabies. We're really happy. Cassie Cavallero is one of our team members. And also Will Crosley is my senior vice president and soon to be successor to the Woodson organization. And I'm so blessed to have Will stepping in for me when I step aside. So Will, I'm just so blessed. There's a prayer that I utter that, Lord, give me the strength to tell and pursue the truth, especially when it's inconvenient to me. Also, George Barnard Shaw asked the rhetorical question, must a Christ die in torment in every age to save those who lack imagination? And Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. Also, if you want to go someplace you haven't been, you got to be willing to do something you haven't done. Or as my grassroots people say, if you keep doing what you do, you keep getting what you got. So before I enter my remarks, someone once asked me, well, Bob, what is the difference between a liberal, a conservative, and a neoconservative? I said, well, I can give you an example. If a man is drowning 20 feet from shore, a liberal comes along and sees him and throws him 40 feet of rope, but doesn't tie it to the dock. Conservatives come along and say, hey, he's drowning 20 feet, I'm gonna give him 10 feet, let him swim the other 10. The neoconservative comes along and sees him drowning and goes home and writes a column about it. That's the environment in which we're in. I want to share with you something that is important. Dr. King, I had a chance to meet him, a little personal autobiography. I was born in South Philadelphia, low-income black, blue-collar neighborhood, where 98% of all households had a man and a woman raising children. When I hear this lie from the left that somehow the problems of the inner city, of the high unemployment, out of wedlock births, the violence is related to the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, that is not true. It is not true. And my life is a living testament that because I was born the same year Bill was, in this blue-collar neighborhood where households had a man and a woman raising children. Elderly people could walk without fear of being mugged by their grandchildren. Never heard a gunfire or children shot in their cribs the way we do today. Deprived was never synonymous with being depraved. Because we had standards. Everybody went to church. You were a Christian, and you believed in family, and you believed in faith, and you believed in this country. My father died when I was 9 years old because of wounds and injuries he received in the First World War. He was with the Harlem Hellcats of Harlem, defending this country, leaving my mother with a 5th grade education and 5 children to raise, 4 boys and 1 girl. But that we had organizations and institutions within that community that stepped up. The Elks, and I can name all the other institutions, mediating institutions within it that stepped up. But it means that I cleave to my friends. There are 6 young men, and I was blessed to select good friends. So I understand why kids join gangs. It is not the organization that we're against, it's the criminal behavior. But when you're growing up in a situation like that, where your dad is gone, and you have friends, they are more important to you almost than your blood family, because they give you safe passage. There are any number of things. So I grew up understanding it, but they were, one of you will know who, one of us became famous, and that is Matt Robinson. He was Gordon on Sesame Street. Do you remember the guy with the big fro? That was Matt. We were in Cub Scouts together. His daughter is Holly Robinson, the actress, who's married to Rodney Peake. And so, but they were a year older than me, and they graduated and left me unaffiliated, no one to talk to. And so I dropped out of high school after 11th grade and went into the Air Force. And I was tested by them, and they sent me to an airborne electronics school, and I was in the space program, flying missile test control in Cape Canaveral. And I finished my GED in high school, in the military, and then took courses in mathematics because I was going to go into the space program. I achieved 12 credits from the University of Miami, but I couldn't walk on the campus because of segregation. So the military provided means for us to have extension courses on the base. It was just a reality of the time, but I never became bitter about that because even though the rules were rigged against me, I was defined by as Chuck Swindoll said, 10% of who we are is defined by our external circumstances. 90% is our attitude about the 10%. And so people like me felt that way. So let me fast forward. So I'm out of the military, I'm working at a juvenile jail at night, and going to college to earn my math degree so I can go back into the space program. And I was locked behind 3 doors with 60 juveniles in there, from gang murder to truancy, with no programs. And when the administration went home, I was taken to unsupervised areas of the prison and I collected money from the other guards to buy things for them and treat them. 6 of those kids I would have adopted if I had the money to do so. And one day when I was cleaning up and I came back, all 60 of them stood and applauded, and I turned on my heels, and I was just losing it. I had a burning bush experience without knowing what a burning bush was. Christ touched my heart. Sometimes he touches us in ways that we don't even realize ourselves what is happening to us. It was later affirmed when I became older. But I got involved in the civil rights movement. But I left the movement on 2 issues: force busing for integration, because I think the opposite of segregation is desegregation, not integration. Because if you say that segregation is inherently unequal, it means anything is all black is all bad. That meant my neighborhood, all of the institutions that served me were delegitimate. And therefore, I rejected that notion. But the most profound thing that happened was that we were picketing outside of a pharmaceutical company in Wyatt Laboratories. And when they desegregated, they'd hired 9 black PhD chemists. And we asked them to join that movement. They said they got these jobs because they were qualified, not because of the sacrifices of those who are janitors and factory workers. I realized that Dr. King said, what good does it do to have the right to eat at a restaurant of your choice, or to live in a neighborhood if you don't have the economic means to exercise that right. I realized then that it's not enough to open the doors of opportunity. You got to give people the means to walk through that door. But the civil rights movement was getting involved with the poverty program and becoming part of now morphing into a grievance industry. In the meantime, the kind of civil environment that was wholesome that I grew up in, I saw suddenly crumbling around me when the government's poverty programs came in and began to separate work from income. It was a deliberate effort by Cloud and Piven. These are two socialists at Columbia University Social Work School. They said, if only the way we can destroy America and make it socialist is to withdraw, separate work from income, then school dropout rates will occur, drug addiction, and we will be replacing fathers with welfare. And then the Black Panther Party said that the nuclear family is therefore Eurocentric and therefore racist. The women's movement said they were hostile to men. The ACLU came in and said that for the social services to ask for the paternity of the child is violating the privacy rights will of these moms. So these forces, but then this was the final blow. When the government set up offices in Harlem and other black communities to entice people into the welfare system, because welfare used to be stigmatized when I was a child. But those forces, the policy, but then the government with the poverty programs began to pour money in. Millions, and the socialists said, well, if we pour and we'll bankrupt the country and they'll be forced to redistribute income. And so what happened is that they began to recruit people into the system. Millions of blacks flooded into the welfare system at a time when the unemployment rate was just 4%. And so what you saw then is a proliferation of out-of-wedlock births, and everything that the left predicted came true. The out-of-wedlock births, the black community up until 1965, every year after slavery, blacks made progress, but it stopped, and the poverty rate from 1945 to 65 was cut in half because of self-help institutions within the black community. But all of that stopped when the government came in, and as a consequence, the problems that we're witnessing today are a consequence of government intervention. And now, what the left has done is said that that is because of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, and it was in 2019, Hannah Nicole Jones of the New York Times published this book, 1619, that really sealed it, that says that America is inherently racist, and therefore all white people are guilty of being privileged, and all blacks are victims. And this is why we have the kind of mass decline that we have. And so the question is, what is our responsibility? What has conservatives been doing about this? And this is where Dr. King said the highest form of maturity is to be willing to be self-critical. And as a conservative, I think that the conservative movement has strategic interests that are compatible with that of the poor because they don't profit from having high taxes and whatnot. But if your job is dependent upon having someone dependent, then your strategic interests, so the strategic interests of the left is hostile to the strategic interests of the poor. So what we did at the Woodson Center is we challenged 1619. Since the messengers were black, we felt that the counter message should come from black. So we brought together about 23 black scholars, and we authored a book called Red, White, and Black, Saving America from Revisionist History and Race Hustlers. And because we wanted to counter, we weren't there to offer a counter argument. We wanted to offer a counter experience. We believe that experience will always trump an argument. And so when we published it, And in these publications that we did, we emphasized the lie that they were telling about blacks' response to slavery and discrimination. And we document the fact that it is resilience, that the left have become crucifixionists. The experience of Christ isn't just the crucifixion. You can't tell the crucifixion without talking about the ascension and the resurrection. And we gave examples, for instance, of resilience. Of Robert Smalls was born a slave in Sumter, South Carolina. And he found himself on a supply ship, him and 6 crewmen. And when his bosses went to dinner, he stole that cruise ship and went and dressed as the captain and went past 5 Southern garrisons and turned the ship over to the Union Navy. And as a consequence of that, he was celebrated and met with Lincoln, and Lincoln allowed blacks to fight in the Civil War. As a consequence of his action, he became the first black naval officer. And after the war, Robert Smalls became a successful businessman and served in the Congress and purchased a plantation on which he was a slave and permitted the slave master's wife, who had become spirits with dementia, to sleep in her master bedroom. That, to me, is an act of radical grace. There are 20 such stories like this about blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires. There's one right here in Colorado, Clara Brown. She washed the long johns of the miners and took the gold dust and converted it into venture capital. And with it, she bought a restaurant and an interest in a mine. She bought it through a straw, white man. And she earned up to $10,000 on that sign and became a philanthropist. Now, she lost her husband and 4 children who were sold separately. And it took her 20 years to find her only daughter. She did not succumb to bitterness or outrage, but she and others, when in 1943, there were no black naval officers. Eleanor Roosevelt persuaded her husband to train some. So the Navy said they're going to train 16 college graduate naval officers, but they're going to give these blacks in 8 weeks what they give white cadets in 16 weeks. Well, they didn't complain and march on Washington. What they did was they recognized that the best way to challenge disrespect is performance. So they covered the windows of their barracks with blankets and stayed up and studied all night. And when they were tested, they scored in the 90th percentile. They said, they cheated, so they tested them individually. They scored in the 93rd percentile. They're called the Golden 13. They became the first black naval officers to be awarded. And today, that score still stands as the highest ever achieved at that school. These should be the stories that we should tell in response to the left's claim that America is forever racist. And they have their counterparts today. There are groups that the Woodson Center supports that you saw in this video. The Pineywood School is an example of these same values that are in place. 115 years old, started by a black man in rural Mississippi. And in that school, the kids they come from the roughest environments you can imagine. They have mandatory chapel, uniforms, mandatory work, and it's a Christ-centered experience. And 100% of these kids graduate and go on to college from some of the roughest backgrounds and around. And there are other programs like that Bill Armstrong helped us. A public housing group came together and decided that we are not defined by our environment. So they drove the drug dealers out, and they began to pay their rent on time, and they began to improve themselves to the point where 600 kids in 10 years went on to college, eliminating teen pregnancy in there. And Bill Armstrong recognized this. When what the Republicans did is had hearings in this, and everybody was shocked. These white conservative Republicans are going into a low-income black neighborhood to ask black people how they were resilient and how they were able to transform and redeem not only individuals but kids and the whole community, how they became a spiritual, economic island of excellence, how they did that. And it was in the front pages of all the papers in D.C. and all the lead stories on TV. So the democratically controlled committee a week later had to run out there and have hearings. And so as a result of that, that's when we had the 7 amendments to the housing. The residents said if we increase our income and reduce our costs, the money is recaptured by the federal government, so there's no incentive. So that became an amendment. And Bill Armstrong and the Republicans came behind them, and we passed it, and it was signed into law. I thought that the Republicans would see this, work with grassroots leaders, as an opportunity to build a bridge between the Pharaohs and the Josephs of this world. But they only saw it as a moment and not a movement, because they were so preoccupied with policy approaches. If conservatives were fighting the Second World War, you would only have a Navy and an Air Force. If you were charging Normandy, you just bomb the heck out of it and wait for them to surrender on the beach. We need a ground game, ladies and gentlemen. And I can give you some example of Dick Riordan, became the first Republican mayor of Los Angeles in 1990. But he did so because he invested charitably and you harvest politically. But you don't invest, you don't plant and harvest in the same year. 2 years before he ran for office, he went into low-income black and Hispanic community and asked the people what they wanted, what they needed. He recruited his friends and built a state-of-the-art training center for the people in that community. And then he announced to the mayor's office, and he won. And all of these Democratic people who were there campaigned for him. And when he ran for re-election, he won by 60% of every demographic. Senator Sam Brownback of Kansas, when he got elected, he brought the Woodson Center in, and doing welfare reform, and we connected him with grassroots groups. Bob Taft in Ohio did the same thing, said, Bob, come in and connect us with these grassroots groups. And we did, and welfare programs were administered by the people suffering the problem, and the goal was to make them independent. And each of those Republicans were elected overwhelmingly for re-elected because they understood. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm saying to you is that if we are to take back this culture, and make no mistake, we are counterculture. They control the universities and all that. But I'm not saying that to discourage anybody, because people are motivated to change when you show them victories that are possible. But as my friend Mike Joyce wrote, that when conservatives' opposition to big government is focused upon shrinking the size of government, when we focus on balancing the budget and lowering taxes, we come across as small-souled bookkeepers. We play right into liberalism's caricature of us as heartless and uncaring. When we put on our green eye shades, enable them to put on the armor of righteousness. Ladies and gentlemen, we can put on our armor of righteousness. When someone said to me, well, Bob, how effective are your faith-based groups against professional service providers? And I gave the example that Ellen and I, we support a program, Pastor Freddie Garcia, both are former drug addicts, but who came to Christ and have freed thousands of people from drugs. Ellen and I went to volunteer, but our daughter was 13 at the time, and Jamal was 16. And midway through the trip, Nifa, his wife, said to these two women, I want you to take Bob's daughter and my 3 granddaughters in the van for dinner, and then to an amusement park and have them home by 9 at night. And so she gave me the keys, they walked out, and Ninfa turned to Ellen and me and said, "Oh, Bob, by the way, they're ex-prostitutes and drug dealers and drug addicts. The kids will be just fine." I was given testimony in the Senate at the time next to 3 psychiatrists, and I told that story. And I turned to those psychiatrists in the hearing room, and I said, "How many of you would trust your daughter to someone that you said was cured?" I would trust without question the profundity of what this happened to these girls. Why? Because Ninfa, if you are a criminal, it makes you very discerning. You know who's hustling. And so that's the confidence that I have in a Christ-centered approach. The Woodson Center has 3,000 grassroots leaders of all racial groups. 80% of my closest friends have letters in front of their names, not behind them. And we come together, not one time in the conferences that we've had is racial animus came up, because they are more concerned about sharing their pathway from brokenness. There's a difference between being broke and to being broken. If you are broke, money can help you or a program, but if you are broken, you need deliverance. And deliverance is different than help. It's like the man with the flat tire. If you have a flat tire, you need help. If you're stuck in a ditch, you need deliverance. And there's a story of the old farmer who saw the man in the ditch, and he connected his horse to him, his single horse, and hitched him up, and he said, "Pull Bill, pull Joe, pull Mike, pull Eric." And the horse moved and pulled the thing out. So the driver said, "You only have one horse. Why are you calling those things?" He said, "He's blind. If he knew he was the only one pulling, he wouldn't do it." A lot of us are like that. If we thought that we were the only one pulling the horse, we wouldn't do it. But I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to end with a quote. America is waiting for a Pharaoh-Joseph partnership. We've got 3,000 grassroots leaders in 39 states who are capable and have demonstrated that they can generate redemption of individuals and also reclaim whole communities. I mean, I saw Christ work in the life of gang members. There was one program 25 years ago in Washington, D.C., where there were 53 murders in a 5-square-block area. We trained these 5 Christ-centered ex-offenders who had moral authority and social trust in the community. And I said, but no one can really measure your effectiveness because you're all over the place. And then this 12-year-old boy was killed in this community, and it embarrassed the officials. I said, God made the choice. Bring him to my office. So they went down, and one of them worked for a car dealership, and they put him in separate vans and came into my office because it was safe territory. And we had a meal waiting for him, because kids will fight when they're drinking, but not when they're eating. I think there's something biblical about that. And these kids sat at the table, we prayed. We intentionally intrude ourselves into their culture. We don't ask permission. We assert our faith. And they said, no one ever asked us to be peaceful. And as a consequence, if you have these young men who are former felons, once their character changes, their characteristic has an advantage. After they signed a peace treaty, they were put to work redeeming the very community they destroyed. One became a foreman, and the others worked for them, and it was front page news. We went down from 53 murders to 0 for 12 years. And I can give you endless examples of God's working in these communities, doing some miraculous work. But the qualities that makes them effective also makes them invisible. They are not protesting anything. You won't see them on television. You got to be intentional and go out and find them. The Bradley Foundation brought me in and said, Milwaukee, all of our experts said they're not there, Bob. I said, I know where to find them. I've never been on the streets, but I know where to look. I went to barbershops, hairdressers, and I said, where do people turn when they're in trouble? I heard the same 3 names came up. So I knocked on their doors, and I said, why do people seek you out when they're in trouble? And they smiled and told me. And I said, well, who else does what you did? And then the next thing I knew, I got 30 people. And then I brought them together, and we trained them. And the Bradley's Foundation set up $5 million back 20 years ago, and every year they spend $5 million. We train their staff to do what we do. I think this is a very prophetic moment in this country. I don't think it's by chance that I'm here. And God bless CCU and its leadership for reaching out, not just to me, because I represent, I think, a resource that God is using to change this country. But change won't come, as I said, by writing white papers or testifying before the Congress or even electing the right people in office. A moral brush fire burns from the bottom up. And it's when Pharaoh and Joseph can come together. What Pharaoh did was reach beyond race and class to empower a 31-year-old Hebrew shepherd. And they established a partnership that saved the land from famine. The famine is this moral and spiritual freefall as they're consuming our children. And I'm not asking you to do this to help some poor folks, because if somebody can find content and meaning to their life in the midst of this toxic community, maybe they have something to share with the sons and daughters in Silicon Valley, where the suicide rate among kids is 6 times the national average. Maybe they have something to speak to the Appalachian moms who are losing their children to prescription drugs. They have something to speak to the black mothers in the inner cities who are losing their children in record numbers to homicide. But we have to put racial grievance aside and deracialize race so we can get to that deep hole in the hearts of our children. A desire for content and meaning. One of the ways that I think I can help is, I said, all you guilty white folks, man, I have become a certified racial exorcist. You're absolved from the slavery and Jim Crow. I'm thinking about getting in on a hustle, maybe in charging $50 or something. But I want to just end by reading something that is near and dear to me. It's a quote from Whitney Phipps, the gospel singer. He said, "It is in the quiet crucible of your personal suffering that your noblest dreams are born and God's greatest gifts are given in compensation for what you have been through. We must speak to the longing in the hearts of the majority of Americans for a re-embrace of those values of love of God, love of country, and love of neighbor." As Oliver Anthony spoke passionately in his song, "Rich Man North of Richmond," his plea to God was to use this broken vessel of a life to call others to his purpose. I hope we will listen to that. And may God bless you and bless this lovely country of ours.